As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today once again, I stand on behalf of the good and proud constituents of Elizabeth to represent their interests in this honourable place. I stand here again to welcome, Mr. Speaker, all of the new members of the Elizabeth family. And I will do it again every single day until you ring the bell. Mr. Speaker, after the debate yesterday on the financial services bills, I am surprised, Mr. Speaker, that this F&M government still thought it prudent to bring this resolution that seeks to authorize and guarantee the borrowing of more than $80 million from the Inter-American Development Bank for waterworks. See, Mr. Speaker, I ask you, why would this F&M government insist on investing yet more borrowed money into the ground rather than into people? Mr. Speaker, this irrational behavior has to be a sign of desperation by this government. See, Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spoke in detail about the concern of the international community on the reckless borrowing and the reckless spending by this F&M government. As mentioned, as recent as this month, the IMF estimated, and I think they estimated conservatively, that our current debt to GDP ratio is 62% and projected to grow to 69% by 2016. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't intend on restating much of what I said yesterday. But what I do want to argue today, Mr. Speaker, is that the Bahamian people cannot trust this F&M government. The Bahamian people cannot trust that their borrowing is going to be accurate. The Bahamian people cannot trust that this government can manage the finances of this country. And, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people certainly cannot trust that they have a plan to pay down all of this debt and all of this borrowing in which they continue to do. How, Mr. Speaker, can we endorse more and more borrowing without a plan to address the repayment of the debt? Mr. Speaker, I say today, it is a good day because the PLP will be the government of the Bahamas in the upcoming elections, and it will be our responsibility to repay all of this debt. It'll be our responsibility to figure out ways to do that. It'll be our responsibility to generate the revenues needed to address the precarious situation that this government has put this country in. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we are up to the challenge on this side, and we will do just that once we are sitting on that side. Mr. Speaker, we on this side argue that borrowing for buildings rather than investing in people is wrong and not progressive policy when you face an environment in which you are in today. A government who cancels the student loan program on the cusp of school starting. A government, Mr. Speaker, who cannot find the money for a national health insurance program.
Point of order, honourable member for Marco City.
I can understand why the member might try to mislead the House because he probably wasn't in the country when this happened. But there was no cancellation of the student loan program. That the program, which when it was started, had a budget of $100 million in terms of guarantee. By the time as we came to office, the program was maxed out in terms of new applicants to the program. But those students who continued in the program continued to be funded and continues to be funded by the program. It was not, is not canceled. So the member should withdraw the words that it was canceled.
Honourable member for Elizabeth.
I don't see why I should withdraw that statement. Mr. Speaker, when you are not offering new loans under the program, you have canceled that program. Oh, absolutely. And, Mr. Speaker, the point of the matter is they could find and they could borrow all of this money for all of these infrastructure works, for all of these different works.
Honourable member, you've been asked to withdraw the statement that the program has been cancelled, and the member for Marco City has assured this House that that program has not been cancelled.
And the member for Marco City is always right.
So I'm asking you to withdraw that statement.
Okay, if you would like me to withdraw, I have no problem withdrawing.
No, I have to withdraw it.
It's withdrawn.
But for clarity, what is he withdrawing?
Whatever the Speaker asked me.
No, no, no.
That I can't- that
But I'm
that
talking to
program
the
was
Speaker.
cancelled,
I'm
I
speaking with
think
the,
you
Mr. Speaker, could you please?
Two members standing.
Could you, I'm trying to figure out what he's
Yes,
withdrawing, sir.
both of you sit, please. The statement, honourable member for Elizabeth, that the cancellation of the student loan program, I think as you said, at the beginning of the school year, some words to that effect. That's the statement that you withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The
The statement about canceling the program is withdrawn. If that's what you are asking to do, no problem, no problem. But this is a government, Mr. Speaker, who decided to not refund the program on the cusp of students going to school. Students who were depending on that loan and in August didn't have it anymore and couldn't go to school. A government, Mr. Speaker, that has refused to bring into place and fund the National Health Insurance Program. A government, Mr. Speaker, who taxes businesses out of business, all at the expense of building things and putting things in the ground. I propose, Mr. Speaker, that this philosophy is a philosophy that is not in the best interest of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, this government has committed to over $200 million in borrowed funds just to build roads. Committed more than $100 million for building power plants. And now they want to commit $80 million more for pipes at the expense of the advancement of Bahamians and the people in our society. But they refuse to invest in the people, Mr. Speaker. But this is not the worst of it. You then look at the mismanagement of these projects, Mr. Speaker, the additional expenses, the additional borrowing on top of borrowing that will have to be done, borrowing that the Bahamian people for generations to come will have to repay. For example, Mr. Speaker, if the reports are true, and I'm informed that they might actually be conservative estimates, the Nassau Road Improvement Project is reported to be at least $40 million over budget. This is more than 35%, Mr. Speaker, of the revised contract price for the entire project as a whole. This, Mr. Speaker, is inexcusable. This is evidence of mismanagement, Mr. Speaker, both financially and in practicality. This major project is the government's claim to fame, and it has failed in all regards. I am also informed, Mr. Speaker, that project such as the Wilson City Power Plant is some $25 million over budget. The government will have to seek additional borrowing to make up for these shortfalls, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the borrowings already taken on the backs of Bahamians for the original contract price. Borrowing that Bahamians will have to repay for generations to come. Borrowings that will increase what seems to be an uncontrollable spiral of government debt levels. Mr. Speaker, this is in addition to the $300 to $400 million in annual deficits we can expect from this F&M government and how they manage the finances of this country. And even when they borrow for earmarked projects, Mr. Speaker, it seems that these themselves are also mismanaged. I am likewise reliably informed that despite having an IDB loan for Family Island projects, such as the rehabilitation of the 3 Islands dock in North Eleuthera, workers were walking off the job because they couldn't get paid. Now, I don't know if this is a fault of the government or the contractor, but it is certainly a result of mismanagement. Mr. Speaker, this government's claim to fame is not their infrastructure projects. It is the financial mismanagement of this country. reckless borrowing, and even more reckless spending. Mr. Speaker, the pattern of cost overruns, which will result in additional borrowings, is just plain reckless. In my opinion, Bahamians deserve better, Mr. Speaker. Bahamians deserve financial security. And if this F&M government, Mr. Speaker, cannot properly manage the ongoing projects within budget, what confidence can you have that they will effectively and efficiently manage this proposed waterworks project within budget? The track record doesn't allow you to trust this F&M government, Mr. Speaker. This government is a government of mistrust. Now, we heard yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to hear this inaccurate political rhetoric in this place by this F&M government trying to define the PLP administration and their borrowings in the prior administration. We heard this notion, and we continue to hear this notion that the PLP borrowed $800 million with nothing to show. Well, nothing can be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. And this argument just demonstrates the philosophy of this government. Let's forget about investing in people. Let's invest in things. That is the test. We on this side, Mr. Speaker, we disagree. We believe in people. Bahamians are the foundation of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. See, I did some investigation and some discussion with my colleagues on the issue of the borrowing during the prior administration. And what I discovered, Mr. Speaker, was shocking. Shocking in that it demonstrates that the legacy of this F&M government has been reckless spending. See, Mr. Speaker, I'm informed immediately coming to office in 2002, the PLP's first order of business was to borrow $125 million to pay outstanding bills and obligations that this F&M government left hanging. See, Mr. Speaker, I was also informed that the outgoing F&M government left all of these unpaid bills because they were scared, I guess, to borrow money to deal with it going into election. But the PLP, as a responsible government, had to find the money to pay these bills. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, when the PLP came to office, we met disaster waiting at the airport. We were faced with cruise ships threatening to pull out because of the appalling condition on the docks. Mr. Speaker, major neglect by the preceding F&M government of the tourism infrastructure that generates economic activity and opportunity in the Bahamas for many, many and thousands of Bahamians. The incoming PLP government, Mr. Speaker, had to make it a priority to spend over $45 million to fix the runways and had to do major work on Prince George Wharf. Mr. Speaker, these were projects that were done on an expedited basis to preserve the well-being of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, to preserve small businesses, to preserve employment, preserve the success of the Bahamian entrepreneur. See, Mr. Speaker, only a couple years after coming to office, the Bahamas experienced direct hits from Hurricane Jean and Francis, which both hit the Bahamas with full force. There was significant devastation and damage to the Bahamas. The PLP government, Mr. Speaker, had to find the money to spend tens of millions of dollars to restore the infrastructure, to repair the damage caused by these two devastating hurricanes. See, Mr. Speaker, the PLP government borrowed money to ensure Bahamians' lives were restored. Opportunities were preserved for Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, for the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. We are a government of the people, Mr. Speaker. See, these are just examples of how Bahamians were the focus of this government on this side. People over things, Mr. Speaker. People above politics, Mr. Speaker. That is the PLP way, and we will not run from that today. See, Mr. Speaker, it is clear, and all the international agencies acknowledge, that we as a country must find the additional revenues in order to reduce the deficit and pay down our national debt, and to put the country in a more stable position financially. We heard the Junior Minister of Finance yesterday speak about 3 ways to pay down debts. He spoke about expanding your economy to increase a tax base. He spoke about increasing taxes, and I think he spoke about selling assets. What was the third option? The junior Minister of Finance gave no policy on economic expansion. Instead, Mr. Speaker, he proclaimed that we are helpless because we cannot do anything that is unique to the Bahamas and Bahamians. We cannot develop additional economic policy for the advancement of Bahamians. We are completely dependent on the United States economy. And this is a short-sighted position and an admitted failure of this government and their economic philosophies and policies. Does this government have any plans that they can inform the Bahamian people on how this debt will be repaid? There is no policy of economic expansion by this government. Is there another asset that they plan on selling? Are more tax increases the plan of the day, Mr. Speaker? See, that is their MO. But that backfired when tax increases dramatically slowed down a Bahamian economy, even further contributing to the decimation of the middle class and small business owner in this country. See, Mr. Speaker, I proclaim that a government that is doing their job, a government for the people, would think outside the box, Mr. Speaker, would establish fundamental and radical economic development ideas to expand our economy, utilizing Bahamians, venturing into industry we may never have really ventured in before, Mr. Speaker. See, my theory is different from the junior Minister of Finance's theory. I believe that you can actually lower taxes for Bahamians if you have a constructive and progressive economic development plan that focuses on the expansion into new industries while supporting and growing your existing industries. This would cause the government revenue, Mr. Speaker, to be generated and increased, as the tax base would be measurably increased. We can do this, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, irrespective of what the U.S. economy looks like. We are strategically located with infrastructure and logistic assets that any other country would be envious of, Mr. Speaker. But we don't utilize these assets to our greatest degree. We don't take advantage of our assets for the best interests of Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. We require economic reform regardless of what the United States is doing. See, we on this side, Mr. Speaker, we believe that Bahamians can actually do it. We believe that they can actually do it for themselves. Those on the other side may not believe that. But the PLP has policies for economic expansion of the Bahamas. The PLP has policies for the advancement of Bahamians. And the PLP has policies for their best interest. See, Mr. Speaker, economic expansion is not a necessity just to maintain the status quo. I'm informed, based on conservative calculations, Mr. Speaker, that we as a country must increase our GDP by 50% over the next 10 to 11 years just in order to stay within the debt-to-GDP ratio we are experiencing today. This is based on conservative estimates of debt levels today, not necessarily taking into account uncontrolled borrowing trends that this F&M government has been under. This is likewise the understanding that over the last 10 years, our GDP has essentially been stagnant, with no measurable growth. So you see, if we have to increase our GDP by 10 to 11% over the next 10 years to maintain our debt level to GDP what it is today, and we have had a stagnant GDP for the last 10 years, it is clear you need fundamental economic reform in the country to accomplish that. Just to put in place a secure foundation of what we live in today on the debt levels, and to prevent uncontrollable borrowing and uncontrollable debt to GDP levels. We need a distinct national plan and policy of economic expansion, Mr. Speaker, and we need it now. Not tomorrow, we need it now. And one of these, Mr. Speaker, on our position is the creation of a trade agenda. We believe in a trade agenda. Mr. Speaker, once we create an environment to develop the Bahamas as a trade hub between Europe and Asia and the Americas, then we will be increasing the opportunities for Bahamians and the ability to attract and build new businesses in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Let me give you just one example, Mr. Speaker, of what I'm talking about. Let me give you just one example. The east coast of the United States, Mr. Speaker, and even countries throughout the Caribbean and Latin America have many small and medium-sized businesses. In fact, they are the engine that generates their economy. These businesses would like to purchase goods from Asia, would like to purchase goods from China and India. But they may not be in a position, Mr. Speaker, to buy the necessary quantities that are required to import from those jurisdictions. A trade vision would be a proactive vision and model for any government, creating a hub of trade in the Bahamas, and especially in an island like Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker. Here you would have the ability for large wholesale exporters from the Far East to have their product here in the Bahamas. Business owners from around the region could come here to the Bahamas to find the products they need for their businesses. These products would not have to be bought in great quantities by container, not if they are here in a trade zone in the Bahamas. The medium-sized business from the United States could come over and palletize what they need for their business and get it on a boat and get it to their business within days, Mr. Speaker, creating efficiencies for these businesses throughout our region, while creating opportunity in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in a new industry that we have failed to promote, creating a bigger tax base, creating career and entrepreneurial opportunities for Bahamians, and bringing in international companies to do business here. See, Mr. Speaker, this is just one model that with the support of the government, Bahamians can grow in career development. Like I said, in ownership of businesses that support this model. International companies doing business here generate revenue here, Mr. Speaker, generate more of a larger tax base for the government to tax, which translates in more revenue for the government to address the debt issues of this country. See, every step of this is revenue generation, Mr. Speaker, but it's also providing opportunities for Bahamians to thrive. The same model, Mr. Speaker, can be reversed, where light manufacturing and assembly is done in the Bahamas, and a manufacturing village, Mr. Speaker, for export to Europe under recently signed trade agreements. See, this would likewise cause entrepreneurial opportunities for Bahamians, career development for Bahamians while attracting international businesses to this country. See, this additional and newfound revenue from trade can likewise be taxed and generate, like I said, revenue for the government in both ways. These are the forward and progressive thinking ideas of this side of a PLP government, Mr. Speaker. These are the economic expansion opportunities that we offer to the Bahamian people. But see, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't stop there. With a firm commitment to a trade agenda, Mr. Speaker, we provide additional opportunities for Bahamians in existing industries, such as the financial services industry, Mr. Speaker. Because with this international trade agenda, there will also be a necessity for international insurance to insure the products here and from. There will also be a necessity, Mr. Speaker, for international investment banking services for Bahamians, such as, and also, Mr. Speaker, commercial opportunities in commercial banking, providing international currency transactions, and providing international currency derivatives, Mr. Speaker. These are all in part of an expansionist philosophy of a PLP government, Mr. Speaker, understanding that the development of one industry, a new industry with a focus that it requires, also develops existing industries, creating those opportunities, Mr. Speaker. See, we sit here and we complain about the brain drain in this country, and we complain that Bahamians are not coming home to work because they cannot find opportunities. By having this economic expansionist philosophy in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, there will be those high-paying and more diversified jobs for the Bahamians on Wall Street to come home, to have better opportunities, and to enjoy being home in a well-paying career, supported these types of trade and international business initiatives of a PLP government, Mr. Speaker. These expansionist parts in these different industries should all be located in the Bahamas to support this economic expansionistic idea. As the financial services industry further develops, Incorporating a robust commercial arm, career opportunities can continue to develop. But see, this is just one example, Mr. Speaker, that outlines the philosophy of the next government of the Bahamas, that outlines the economic ideas of what we on this side think is in the best interest of Bahamians. This is why, Mr. Speaker, Bahamians will support a PLP government next time around, because we have ideas for their best interest. We don't throw our hands up in the air and say, we can't do anything about it. We have ideas. We have policies, irrespective of what other countries are doing, because we have the assets to do it, and we have failed to do it. We have the opportunities to do it, but we have failed to do it. We will do it on this side, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the Junior Minister of Finance discussed tax policy and taxation as a method of raising revenue. We witnessed this F&M government, Mr. Deputy, undertake the raising of taxes to do just that, to try to raise revenue. But that didn't work, Mr. Deputy. When one reads these international agency reports from both credit rating agencies and institutions like the IMF, they read like a broken record, Mr. Deputy. Each and every one of them suggesting we need to reform our tax system. This F&M government has not even opened up discussion on tax reform. What might their methodology be? What are their plans? We have heard nothing on prospective tax reform policies by this government. The only thing we have heard is that they say they are committing to making revenue collection more efficient, Mr. Deputy. See, we don't believe that this is enough to address the revenue shortfalls and to pay down the debt of this country. Mr. Deputy, organizations such as the IMF acknowledge that these government efforts to improve tax administration. But even they say a stronger fiscal effort is needed. And I quote, that reforms aimed at broadening the tax base, for example, the adoption of a domestic consumption tax, should therefore be a key priority. What is the plans from this government in addressing this elephant in the room, Mr. Deputy? What are your tax reform proposals? Do you have any? See, I at the very least believe there should be an ongoing national discussion on this issue, getting the buy-in from all relevant constituents that are affected. All options should be discussed, Mr. Deputy, the pros and the cons. What about any kind of tax policy? We got to discuss it all, Mr. Deputy, because the importance of this issue is transparency. When discussing such a fundamental issue to the country, Mr. Deputy, transparency is required. Where does this F&M government have us on this journey of tax reform? Nobody knows. And so, Mr. Deputy, we speak today about this resolution to guarantee the borrowing of $80 million. I do not believe, Mr. Deputy, especially under this F&M government, that we should be borrowing more money at this time without a plan of repayment. I likewise do not believe that under this F&M government that this project will be completed on time or in budget. And this project likely, I don't believe under this F&M government, will be completed without inconvenience and economic hardship to the Bahamian people. Mr. Deputy, there's a genuine concern as we go ahead and pass $80+ million of more borrowing. I do not trust this F&M government with additional borrowing. I do not think they could spend it wisely. I think that if you allow more borrowing without distinct plans on the repayment of the debt, this country will be pushed into a perilous state, Mr. Deputy. See, I believe we should be investing in people. The only good thing, Mr. Deputy, is that the PLP will be the next government of the Bahamas. And like I said, we will have the responsibility of managing this project. And we will have the responsibility of repaying this debt. And we will ensure, Mr. Deputy, on this side, as the government of the Bahamas, that the debt is repaid. We will ensure that this project is managed properly and that the economy and fiscal responsibility is managed properly, Mr. Deputy. See, this is the only saving grace to the Bahamians at this time, that the PLP will be the next government of the Bahamas. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Deputy.